Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Hayes had been out of the military for 7 years, but she still wore the patch. It was a worn cloth emblem, faded from years of exposure to desert sun and mountain wind. The edges were frayed where it had been stitched and unstitched, moved from uniform to uniform, from deployment to deployment. She kept it in a small frame on her desk at home, next to a photograph of her team from 2015, the year everything changed. Most people who saw the patch didn't know what it was. Delta Force patches weren't something you advertised. Secrecy was part of the covenant. You didn't talk about where you served, who you served with, or what you did. You certainly didn't walk around displaying your credentials like a badge on a police officer. The whole point was that nobody knew. But Rebecca wore hers on a chain around her neck sometimes, hidden under her shirt. And sometimes, on cold mornings when she forgot about the world, she wore it on a baseball cap or a vest when she was just running errands, not thinking about whether anyone would notice. It was just a patch. It was just her past. What harm could it do? The harm started on a Tuesday morning at the coffee shop in downtown Portland, Oregon. Rebecca had moved to Portland 3 years ago, after leaving her job as a private security consultant for a firm that worked with special operations veterans. She had wanted to disappear into civilian life, to find a place where no one knew her name or what she had done. Portland seemed like the kind of city where people let you be yourself without asking too many questions. She was standing in line at Blue Moon Coffee, the small shop on Morrison Street that had become her morning ritual, when she heard the laughter. It came from a table in the corner, where 3 men in their 30s were sitting. They were looking at her. Or more specifically, they were looking at her chest, where she had worn her old Delta Force patch on a gray athletic shirt. She had thrown it on without thinking that morning. It was just a workout shirt. She was just getting coffee. One of the men said something to the others, and all 3 of them laughed. It wasn't a friendly sound. Rebecca felt her jaw tighten, but she didn't turn around. She ordered her coffee, black, no sugar, the way she had been ordering it for 7 years, and moved to the pickup counter. But the men didn't leave her alone. "Excuse me," one of them called out. He was tall, with the kind of swagger that came from some combination of money and stupidity. "That patch you're wearing. Where'd you get that?" Rebecca could have ignored him. She could have taken her coffee and left. But something in her, some part of the soldier that never really went away, made her turn around. "It's my patch," she said quietly. The men laughed again. "Yeah, right," the tall one said. "Delta Force. That's rich. You know what Delta Force is?" Rebecca knew exactly what Delta Force was. She had been part of the most elite special operations unit in the world. She had trained harder than any man in her unit. She had bled with them. She had buried soldiers who were her brothers. She had earned that patch with more than 7 years of sacrifice. But she just said, "Yeah. I know what it is." "So where'd you buy it?" another man asked. He was smaller, with a beer belly and a condescending smile. "They sell those on eBay now. Military cosplay is huge. My cousin does it." "I didn't buy it," Rebecca said. "Sure you didn't," the tall man said. He stood up from his table and walked over to her. He was trying to intimidate her, Rebecca could see. He was trying to make himself look big. "Listen, lady, I don't know what your deal is, but Delta Force doesn't have women. They never have, and they never will. It's a men's club. So whatever fantasy you've got going on, you should probably keep it to yourself. Nobody believes it." Rebecca's hands had made fists without her conscious decision. She had to force herself to relax them. The barista was watching her now, nervous, ready to call the police if things escalated. Other customers were staring. This was exactly the kind of scene she had come to Portland to avoid. "You're right," Rebecca said. She kept her voice steady and low. "You're absolutely right. I apologize for the confusion." She paid for her coffee and left the shop. Behind her, she could hear the men laughing again. Rebecca drove home with her jaw clenched so tight she thought her teeth might break. She lived in a small house in northeast Portland, a 1970s craftsman with a big backyard and a fence that kept the world out. She had bought it specifically because of that fence. When she got inside, she took off the athletic shirt and threw it in the trash. Then she sat on her couch and stared at the patch on her desk, the one in the frame, and she felt something inside her that she thought she had learned to control: rage. The men at the coffee shop weren't wrong. Delta Force had never officially had women. The unit had never recruited women, never accepted women, never trained women. For decades, it had been the most exclusively male organization in the entire military. Until Rebecca. She had been recruited at the age of 21, the year before everything changed. She had been a company commander in the 82nd Airborne, already noticed by the right people, already being trained for something bigger. And then a memo came down from the Department of Defense. By presidential order, all military special operations units were opening their doors to women. Most units dragged their feet. They created testing standards so high they were designed to fail women. They created a culture where women were harassed, excluded, and made to feel unwelcome. But Delta Force had chosen a different path. The command at Fort Bragg decided that if women were going to be allowed in, they were going to do it right. They were going to recruit the best, train the best, and treat the best like soldiers instead of like novelties or mistakes. Rebecca had been selected in that first group. There had been 5 women chosen initially, though only Rebecca and one other woman, Sarah, had made it all the way through the selection process. That process was brutal. It was designed to break people. Most people broke. Rebecca and Sarah didn't. For 8 years, Rebecca had served with Delta Force. She had been deployed to Afghanistan 4 times. She had been deployed to Iraq. She had conducted operations in East Africa, in Southeast Asia, in locations that were never officially acknowledged. She had earned her patch through blood and sweat and the kind of sacrifice that most people couldn't even imagine. And now, a man at a coffee shop was telling her that she didn't exist. Over the next week, Rebecca tried to ignore it. She told herself it didn't matter what some random guy thought. She told herself that she knew the truth about who she was and what she had done. But the truth was, his words had gotten under her skin in a way she hadn't expected. She started avoiding the coffee shop. She started avoiding places where she might run into people. She made excuses not to attend the veterans meetup group she had been thinking about joining. She started spending more time alone, more time in her house, behind her fence. Then, on a Friday evening, she got a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the other end belonged to someone from her past. His name was General Marcus Kane, and he had been her commanding officer for 3 years while she was with Delta Force. "Rebecca," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "It's been a long time." Rebecca sat down. She hadn't heard from Marcus in 3 years. They had kept in touch at first, after she left the unit, but then they had lost contact, as people do. Life moved on. New deployments, new soldiers, new operations. The past faded. "General," she said. "What a surprise." "I'm coming to Portland next week," Marcus said. "There's a conference on counterterrorism and special operations at Portland State University. I'm on a panel. I was hoping you might be able to meet for lunch while I'm in town." Rebecca hesitated. She wanted to see Marcus. She didn't want to see Marcus. She wanted to talk about the old days, when she had known exactly who she was and what she was supposed to do. She didn't want to talk about any of that, because talking about it meant remembering. "Of course," she said. "I'd like that." They arranged to meet at a restaurant near the university on Wednesday at noon. Rebecca spent the next week anxious about the meeting. She thought about what to wear. She thought about what they would talk about. She thought about whether Marcus still thought of her as a soldier or whether he, like the man at the coffee shop, thought of her as something else now, something lesser, something that didn't quite fit. On Wednesday morning, she dressed carefully. She wore jeans and a blue blouse. She wore her hair down, not in the tight bun she had worn every day for 8 years. She looked like what she was, a civilian woman in her mid-40s, out of the military for 7 years, trying to figure out how to exist in a world that didn't quite believe in her anymore. She almost didn't go. 3 times driving to the restaurant, she considered turning around and texting an excuse. But she kept going. She owed it to Marcus to at least show up. The restaurant was upscale but not pretentious, the kind of place where military people and academics could both feel comfortable. Rebecca arrived 5 minutes early and was seated at a table by the window. She ordered water and waited. Marcus arrived exactly at noon. He looked the way he always looked, tall, fit, composed, with the kind of bearing that came from 30 years in the military and another 10 in command. His hair was completely gray now, but his eyes were the same, clear, intelligent, missing nothing. When he saw Rebecca, he smiled. It was a real smile, not a professional one. "Rebecca," he said, and he pulled her into a hug. It was brief, proper, but genuine. "You look good. You look happy." Rebecca wasn't sure she looked happy, but she appreciated him saying it. They sat down and ordered lunch. For a while, they talked about safe things. Marcus told her about his new position, working in strategic planning for SOCOM, United States Special Operations Command. Rebecca told him about her consulting work, about her house in Portland, about the coffee shops she liked and the hiking she did on weekends. But underneath the small talk, there was a current of something else. There was the recognition of shared experience, of a bond that never fully goes away once it's formed in the kind of crucible where Delta Force training happens. Finally, Marcus said, "Tell me something, Rebecca. How are you really doing?" Rebecca looked at him, and something in her decided to tell him the truth. "I'm not doing great," she said quietly. "I left the military thinking I could just go back to being a normal person. But the thing is, I'm not a normal person. I'm someone who did things that most people will never do. I'm someone who was part of something extraordinary. And now I live in this world where nobody knows what that means, and nobody really believes me if I tell them." Marcus listened without interrupting. "Last week," Rebecca continued, "I wore my old patch to get coffee. And a guy at the coffee shop told me I was lying. He told me Delta Force doesn't have women. He told me I was pretending." She looked down at her water glass. "And the worst part was, I almost believed him. I almost thought, maybe he's right. Maybe I made the whole thing up in my head. Maybe I'm just someone with delusions of grandeur." Marcus set down his fork. He was quiet for a long moment. "Rebecca," he said finally, "do you know what percentage of people who serve in special operations are women?" "Less than 5%, Rebecca said. "I know the statistics. Do you know how many women have ever made it through Delta Force selection?" Rebecca did know. The number was small. Even smaller when you only counted the ones who had served on active combat teams. "We were the first generation," Marcus said. "You were the first. When you earned that patch, you weren't just becoming a soldier. You were writing history. You were proving that something could be true even if no one had ever seen it before. And yes, there are people who will deny it. There are people who will mock it. There are people who are so tied to the old way of doing things that they can't accept what's in front of their faces." He leaned forward. "But Rebecca, I was there. I trained you. I deployed with you. I watched you earn that patch. And I want to tell you something very clearly, you didn't imagine it. You didn't make it up. It was real. You are real. And every single thing you did was as much a part of Delta Force as anything I ever did." Rebecca felt tears starting to form, and she was mortified. She was in a restaurant in the middle of the day, and she was about to cry. "There's something I haven't told anyone," Marcus continued. "Something that isn't widely known. When I first came to Delta Force, I earned my patch in an operation that almost nobody survived. It was in Afghanistan, 2003. We were inserted to secure a weapons cache in a Taliban stronghold. The operation went south very quickly. 3 of my team members were killed. 2 of us made it out. Rebecca listened, waiting for him to continue. The other person who made it out was Sarah, Marcus said, referring to the other woman who had survived Delta Force selection alongside Rebecca. She was trained as a medic, and she saved my life that day. I would have bled out if she hadn't gotten to me in time. And you know what? The patch I wear is just as much hers as it is mine. The patch we all earn, we earn it together. No man earns it alone. And no woman, either. But what I'm saying is that the women who earned it, they earned it the same way. With the same sacrifice. With the same commitment. He paused, and then he said something that would change everything. I'm going to be very clear about this. In 2015, when we were in the Korengal Valley in Afghanistan, and we extracted that Taliban commander, Rebecca, you were the one who went into that compound first. You were the one who took the fire first. You were the one who made sure the rest of us got out alive. I earned my patch the day Sarah saved my life. You earned yours the day you saved ours. Rebecca sat back in her chair. She couldn't speak. So here's what we're going to do, Marcus said. You're coming with me to the panel on Wednesday. You're going to sit up there on stage with me and the other veterans. And we're going to tell your story. And if anyone in that room wants to challenge whether you earned that patch, they can challenge me. Because I was there. I know. The Portland State University auditorium was large and modern, with tiered seating that could hold about 400 people. When Rebecca arrived on Wednesday evening, it was almost completely full. The panel was called Women in Special Operations, Breaking Barriers, Serving with Honor. Besides Marcus, there were 2 other speakers, a woman named Colonel Jennifer Park who had been a pilot in combat operations, and a retired SEAL named Captain David Morrison who had worked extensively with female special operations personnel in recent years. Rebecca had been nervous all day. Marcus had told her not to prepare anything special, just to be ready to talk about her experiences. But what if someone asked her something she didn't want to answer? What if someone called her a liar? What if the entire audience decided that she didn't belong there? Marcus found her backstage before the panel began. He was in his dress uniform, which always made him look more official, more authoritative. But he also looked like the Marcus she remembered, calm, confident, unafraid. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Terrified," Rebecca admitted. "Good," Marcus said. "Fear means you understand what this means. That's the right attitude. Now, just remember, you're not there to convince anyone of anything. You're there to tell the truth. That's all you have to do." They walked out onto the stage. Rebecca tried not to look at the audience, but her eyes scanned them anyway. There were uniformed military personnel scattered throughout. There were civilians. There were other veterans. There were students taking notes. The moderator was a woman in her 60s named Dr. Elaine Morrison. She introduced each panelist, and when she introduced Rebecca, she said, "Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Hayes served 8 years with United States Special Operations, including multiple combat deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. She is now retired and works as a private consultant." Rebecca found that odd, the use of her actual rank and her real name, displayed publicly. But Marcus had told her that was the idea. No more hiding. No more pretending. Just the truth, out in the open for everyone to see. The panel discussion began with each of them giving opening statements. Colonel Park talked about being the first female pilot in her unit, about breaking through a ceiling that had never been broken before. Captain Morrison talked about his observations of how female special operations personnel performed, and how their integration had actually improved unit cohesion and effectiveness. Then Marcus spoke. "I've been in the military for 40 years, he began. I've served in combat in 5 different countries. I've led thousands of soldiers, men and women. And I want to tell you something, the myth that women can't do this job is just that, a myth. I know that because I've worked with some of the most competent, dedicated, brave individuals this country has ever trained, and many of them have been women. He paused, and his eyes found Rebecca in the line of panelists. Specifically, he continued, I've trained and deployed with Rebecca Hayes. And I want to tell you about something that happened in 2015 that not many people know about, because it was classified. But I think it's time for the American people to know that there are women out there serving this country at the highest level, in the most dangerous operations, and they're doing it just as well as any man ever has. Rebecca's heart started racing. She knew what Marcus was about to do, and she wasn't entirely sure she was ready for it. Marcus told the story of the Korengal Valley operation. He didn't give too many details, some things remained classified, but he explained the basics. They had gone in to secure intelligence. The operation had been compromised. They had taken fire. Rebecca was my junior team leader, Marcus said. When we came under fire, she didn't hesitate. She didn't think about the fact that she was a woman working with a team of men who had trained to accept women in the unit but who had never actually been in a real combat situation with a woman before. She didn't think about any of that. She thought about the mission and about keeping her team alive. She moved toward the fire instead of away from it. She made decisions that saved lives. And yes, she was terrified, we were all terrified. But she was terrified and she did her job anyway. Marcus looked at Rebecca directly. That is what courage is, he said. That is what a soldier is. The audience was absolutely silent. Then Dr. Morrison, the moderator, said, Rebecca, would you like to respond? Rebecca's mouth was dry. She had never prepared for this moment. She had never thought she would have to publicly claim her service, her story, her identity as a soldier. She took a breath and leaned toward the microphone. I left the military 7 years ago, she said. Not because I didn't love it, but because I was tired. I was tired of fighting the war and also fighting the assumptions. I was tired of having to prove myself every single day. I was tired of wondering if people believed me or if they thought I was just riding on the coattails of the men around me. She paused, gathering her words. When I left, I thought I could just go back to being a normal person. But the truth is, I don't know how to be that. I am a soldier. I am special operations personnel. I have done things that most people will never do, and I have sacrificed things that I can't talk about in this room. And for a long time, I felt like I had to hide that. Like I had to apologize for it. Like I had to downplay it and pretend it was less than it was. She looked out at the audience. But General Kane just told you something important. He told you that I did my job. That I did it well. And he did that publicly, in front of all of you, knowing that there are people in this room and people who will hear about this who are going to think it's not possible. Who are going to think that he's exaggerating or lying to be politically correct. I see some of those faces in this audience right now. Rebecca pointed directly at a cluster of seats where several men in military uniforms were sitting with expressions of skepticism. But here's the thing, she continued. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter if you believe me or not. Because I know the truth. The people I served with know the truth. The people I bled with, the people I would have died for, they know the truth. And that has to be enough. She sat back in her chair, her hands shaking from the adrenaline. The auditorium erupted into applause. Some of it was enthusiastic and genuine. Some of it seemed obligatory. But it was there, rolling over Rebecca like a wave. The rest of the panel discussion went smoothly. They took questions from the audience. Most of them were supportive and thoughtful. But there was one question that everyone was waiting for, and it came from a man in the middle of the auditorium who stood up with a challenging expression on his face. General Kane, the man said, I respect your service, but I have to ask you directly, Delta Force has never officially had women. How can you justify claiming that this woman earned a Delta Force patch when there was no official Delta Force female program? Marcus smiled. It was the kind of smile that suggested he had been waiting for exactly this question. You're absolutely right, Marcus said. Delta Force has never officially had a women's program. Because Delta Force doesn't have separate programs based on gender. It has one program. One standard. One patch. And when women started going through that program and making it all the way through, they were earning the same patch as the men. The fact that it took decades for that to happen doesn't make their achievement less valid. It just means we were slower than we should have been to recognize that merit is merit, regardless of gender. The man sat down, looking unsatisfied but not willing to push further. After the panel ended, people came up to talk to them. Some wanted to shake Rebecca's hand and thank her for her service. Some wanted to ask her questions about her experience. A few older men looked at her with expressions of disbelief, as if she might disappear if they blinked. One woman, who introduced herself as a lieutenant in the Air Force, came up to Rebecca with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," the woman said. "I needed to hear this. I needed to know that it was possible. I'm applying for special operations training next year, and I was so scared that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, nobody would ever believe that I belonged. Thank you for proving that I'm not crazy for wanting this." Rebecca held the young woman's hand and felt something shift inside her. This was why Marcus had asked her to do this. This was why the truth mattered. Because there were women out there, young women, women who were just beginning their journeys, and they needed to know that the path had already been walked by people who looked like them, who came from where they came from, who had the same doubts and fears. After the crowd dispersed, Marcus pulled Rebecca aside. "Thank you," he said. "I know that was hard. I'm not sure I did it right," Rebecca admitted. "You were honest," Marcus said. "That's the only right way to do it." That night, Rebecca went home and did something she hadn't done in 7 years. She took the patch out of the frame on her desk, and she stitched it onto an old uniform that she had kept in the back of her closet. The uniform no longer fit quite right, her shoulders were smaller now, her waist was thicker, but the patch fit perfectly. She looked at herself in the mirror wearing that uniform, with that patch sewn over her heart, and for the first time since leaving the military, she didn't feel like she was pretending. She felt like she was home. 2 weeks after the panel discussion, the video went viral. Someone had recorded the entire event and posted it online. Rebecca woke up one morning to find that her email was flooded with messages. There were messages from military veterans, from female service members, from people she hadn't heard from in years. There were also messages from people she didn't know, people who had seen the video and wanted to congratulate her or thank her or tell her their own stories. Local news picked up the story. "Local woman reveals Delta Force service at PSU panel," the headline read. The story didn't give away any classified information, but it did make Rebecca's name very public, very visible, very real. Rebecca didn't know how to feel about the attention. Part of her wanted to hide. Part of her wanted to lean into it. She went back to her normal routine, work, coffee, home, and tried to pretend that her life hadn't just become considerably more complicated. One morning, almost exactly 3 weeks after the panel discussion, Rebecca went back to Blue Moon Coffee. She hadn't been there since the day the man had mocked her patch. She had been avoiding it, going to a different coffee shop across town. But that morning, she was running late, and Blue Moon was on her way, and she needed her caffeine fix. She pushed open the door with trepidation, half expecting to feel uncomfortable or anxious. But instead, she felt calm. She was different now. She had claimed her truth publicly. She had stood on a stage in front of 400 people and said, "This is who I am." The barista who had been working the day of the incident recognized her. His name was Jason, and he looked embarrassed. "Oh man," he said. "I saw that video. I saw you on the news. I feel terrible about what happened here. Those guys," he shook his head. "I should have said something. Rebecca waved a hand. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Can I make your coffee? Jason asked hopefully. On the house? Rebecca smiled. Just the regular. Thank you. She paid for her coffee anyway and went to sit by the window, the same spot where she always sat. She opened her laptop and started answering some of her emails. She was so absorbed in her work that she almost didn't notice when the tall man from 3 weeks ago walked into the coffee shop. He looked different than she remembered. Smaller, somehow. Less intimidating. He ordered his coffee and then he looked around the shop, and his eyes landed on Rebecca. She could see the moment he recognized her, his face went pale, and his expression changed from casual indifference to something like panic. For a moment, Rebecca thought he would just leave. He had his coffee. He could go. They could both pretend this wasn't happening. But instead, he walked over to her table. Hey, he said. His voice was smaller than before. I think you're the person from the news. The one from the panel at PSU. Rebecca looked up from her laptop. I am, she said. The man looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. I'm really sorry, he said. About what I said 3 weeks ago. I didn't know. I shouldn't have assumed. Rebecca studied him for a moment. She could see genuine remorse on his face. She could see that he had watched the video. She could see that he had figured out that he had been wrong, and it was making him uncomfortable. She could have been angry. She could have been cold. She could have told him that his assumptions had contributed to her worst days, that his mockery had pushed her further into isolation and doubt. But instead, she said, sit down. The man looked surprised, but he sat. What's your name? Rebecca asked. Tyler, he said. Tyler Morrison. Tyler, I appreciate your apology, Rebecca said. I do. But I want to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully. Tyler nodded. When you said what you said 3 weeks ago, I almost believed you, Rebecca said. I almost thought that maybe I was crazy. Maybe I had imagined my entire military career. Maybe I was delusional. That's how powerful your words were. That's how much impact dismissal can have. Tyler looked down at the table. The reason I'm telling you this, Rebecca continued, is not to make you feel bad. You already feel bad. The reason I'm telling you is so you understand that casual dismissal has real consequences. When you tell a woman that her experience isn't real, that her achievements aren't legitimate, that she's lying or delusional, you're doing more than just hurting her feelings. You're participating in a system that keeps women out of these spaces. A system that makes women doubt themselves. She paused. I'm going to assume, Rebecca said, that you didn't mean to be that person. I'm going to assume that if you had known, you would have believed me. But now you do know. And I hope the next time you encounter a woman who claims to have done something remarkable, you'll give her the benefit of the doubt. I hope you'll question your assumptions. Tyler was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady. I was wrong, he said. And I'm sorry. Not just because you're right or because the video proved that you were telling the truth. I'm sorry because I was looking for a reason not to believe you. And I think I know why. I was intimidated. There's something about the idea of a woman being that capable, being that strong, that made me feel like I had to tear her down. And that's a problem with me, not with you. Rebecca felt something warm unfold in her chest. She hadn't expected this level of self-awareness. I think that's very honest, she said. And I appreciate it. They talked for a while longer. Tyler told her that he was a tech entrepreneur, that he had no military background, that his initial dismissiveness had come from a place of genuine ignorance. He asked her about her service. He asked her about the panel. He asked her about what it had been like to be a woman in Delta Force. By the time Tyler left the coffee shop, Rebecca felt like she had made a strange kind of peace with him. Not a friendship, exactly. But an understanding. After he was gone, Rebecca sat alone with her coffee and her laptop, and she thought about something Marcus had said during their lunch. He had told her that the path she had walked was meant to be walked by others who came after her. That her sacrifice, her struggle, her achievement, was not just for her own benefit but for everyone who would come after. In that moment, sitting in that coffee shop where she had felt so dismissed and so small just 3 weeks earlier, Rebecca understood what Marcus meant. Her willingness to be visible, to claim her truth publicly, had created a space for other women. Had made it possible for people like Tyler, and countless others, to have their assumptions challenged and maybe, just maybe, changed. She pulled out her phone and called Marcus. "I have an idea," she said when he picked up. "About what I want to do next." Over the next 6 months, Rebecca and Marcus worked together to build something new. It started small. Rebecca created a website called The Path Forward, designed to tell the stories of women in special operations. She interviewed female veterans from Delta Force, the Naval Special Warfare Command, the Air Force Special Operations Command. She recorded their stories, their experiences, the challenges they had faced, and the victories they had achieved. The response was overwhelming. The website went from getting 50 visitors a day to 5,000. News outlets started picking up the stories. Women who had been serving in isolation, thinking they were the only ones, suddenly found community. Young women who were considering applying for special operations training found role models and proof that it was possible. But Rebecca didn't want it to be just a website. She wanted it to be a real organization, with a real mission. And Marcus helped her build it. Together, they created the Delta Generation Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting women in military special operations. The foundation did several things. It provided scholarships and mentorship to women preparing for special operations training, it advocated for policy changes that would remove barriers to women in elite units, and it worked to change the culture within the military by highlighting the achievements of women who had already broken through. Marcus used his connections and credibility to build a board of directors that included current and retired military leadership, former special operations personnel, and civilians who cared about this issue. Within a year, the foundation had raised over $2 million. But the thing that made Rebecca proudest wasn't the money or the publicity. It was the letters she received from women. There was a letter from a 23-year-old woman named Cameron who was preparing for Delta Force selection. Cameron wrote, "I saw your video. I read your story. And suddenly, something that seemed impossible seemed possible. I'm scared, but I'm not scared that I can't do it. I'm scared that I won't want it badly enough. Thank you for showing me that women like me exist in these spaces." There was a letter from a sergeant named Alexis who had been passed over for a leadership position in favor of a less qualified man. Alexis wrote, "I've been told my whole career that I'm not as good as men. I didn't believe it, but I wasn't sure anymore. Then I read your story, and I realized, that's not true. We're just as good. We just have to be twice as visible and twice as loud about it." There was a letter from a woman named Jennifer who had left special operations after 5 years. Jennifer wrote, "I left because I felt alone. I felt like if I wasn't there, nothing would change. But your work is changing things. The women coming up now won't feel as alone as I did. That matters. That really matters." One day, Marcus called Rebecca with news that made her heart race. "I've been asked to take a new position," he said. "As the deputy commander of SOCOM. The current commander wants to make sure that the integration of women in special operations is done right, is championed from the top, and doesn't get lost in the bureaucracy." "Marcus, that's amazing," Rebecca said. "I want you to be part of it," Marcus said. "I want to hire you as a civilian advisor. You would work directly with me on policy and culture change. You'd have a real seat at the table. What do you think?" Rebecca said yes immediately. Over the next 2 years, with Marcus in his new position and Rebecca working as his civilian advisor, things began to shift. Not dramatically. Change in the military was always slow. But perceptibly. More women were being recruited for special operations training. The attrition rates began to equalize, women were no longer leaving at significantly higher rates than men. And more importantly, the culture began to change. Senior leaders started making it clear that women in special operations were not a social experiment. They were soldiers. They were capable. They were equal. Rebecca worked with Marcus to redesign training programs, to remove unnecessary barriers that weren't based on actual job requirements, to create mentorship systems where experienced female operators could guide newer ones. She helped draft new policies on sexual harassment and assault in special operations units, because it turned out that was a significant problem, and nobody had been willing to talk about it before. She also continued to run the Delta Generation Foundation, which by year 2 had expanded to offer services for female veterans, including mental health support, career transition coaching, and legal support for women who had experienced harassment or discrimination. On a cold day in February, 2 years after the PSU panel, Rebecca received an invitation. She was being asked to speak before Congress about women in military special operations. She would be testifying before the Senate Armed Services Committee about the current state of women in Delta Force and other elite units, about what policies were working, about what still needed to change. Rebecca spent a week preparing her testimony. She worked with Marcus to make sure the information was accurate. She thought carefully about what she wanted to say, what story she wanted to tell, what she wanted the senators to understand. The day she testified, she wore her dress uniform. Not the one she had worn in the panel discussion at PSU, but a new one, freshly pressed, with all her medals and decorations. She had earned the right to wear it, and she was going to claim that right fully. She sat before the committee and looked into the faces of powerful people, and she told them the truth. "I was the first woman to complete Delta Force selection," she began. "At the time, nobody believed that women could do this job. There was no official women's program because it was assumed women couldn't make it through the training. But I made it through. Another woman made it through with me. And then more women came after us, and they made it through too." She described her experience. She talked about the training, the deployments, the moments of doubt and fear. She talked about the enemy fire and the sacrifice and the bond with her team. And then she said something that made one senator sit forward and really listen. "I am here to tell you that this is not about political correctness or social justice. This is about national security. It is about making sure that we are accessing the talent pool that includes half the population. It is about making sure that the women who are willing to sacrifice, willing to be strong, willing to do this job, are allowed to do it. Because every woman we turn away is a woman who could have been your daughter, your sister, your wife. Every woman we exclude is a failure of our military system, not a victory for it." After she testified, there were 17 journalists waiting to interview her. She did them all. One of the interviews was with a major news network, and the reporter, a woman named Maria Gonzalez, asked her something that cut to the heart of everything Rebecca had been working toward. "Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, if you could tell every woman in America one thing about your experience, what would it be?" Maria asked. Rebecca thought about this carefully. "I would tell them," she said slowly, "that the things that society tells you are your limitations are lies. I would tell them that they are stronger than they believe, more capable than they've been told, and absolutely worthy of the space they want to occupy. I would tell them that there will be people who doubt them, and that's okay. Because the only person who really needs to believe in you is you. And once you believe in yourself, once you claim your own strength and your own truth, nothing can take that away." 3 years after the PSU panel discussion, Rebecca sat in a coffee shop in Portland, Washington, just across the river from her home in Oregon. She was meeting with a woman named Captain Lisa Chen, who had recently become the 4th woman to achieve the rank of captain in Delta Force. Lisa had contacted Rebecca through the Delta Generation Foundation. She wanted guidance on how to handle the pressures of being visible, of being the face of women in special operations, of having people project their expectations and fears and hopes onto her. Rebecca understood. It was something she had navigated for years now. The thing about being the first or one of the first, Rebecca told Lisa, is that you become a symbol whether you want to or not. People see you and they either see proof that women can do this or proof that women shouldn't. There's not a lot of middle ground. And that can be exhausting. How do you deal with it? Lisa asked. I stopped trying to convince people who didn't want to be convinced, Rebecca said. I focused on the people who were open to being convinced. I focused on the women coming up, and on the men who were already allies. I focused on my work, on what I could control. And I accepted that some people would never believe me, and that was okay. Lisa nodded slowly, absorbing this. I also made peace with the fact that I'm allowed to exist exactly as I am, Rebecca continued. I'm allowed to be a woman and a soldier at the same time. I'm allowed to be strong and vulnerable. I'm allowed to have doubts and still be capable. I'm allowed to take up space. And you are too. That evening, after Lisa left, Rebecca drove home. She went into her house and went directly to her home office, where the framed patch still hung on her wall. But next to it now was another frame, containing a photograph from the congressional hearing. In the photo, Rebecca was sitting before the Senate Armed Services Committee, in her dress uniform, with her hand raised as she swore to tell the truth. She also had a photo of her and Marcus after he had been promoted to full 4-star general. And photos from various events where the Delta Generation Foundation had given scholarships to women in special operations training. And a handwritten letter from Cameron, the young woman who had written to her after seeing the PSU video. Cameron had written to tell her that she had successfully completed Delta Force selection. She had earned her patch. Rebecca looked at these images, her past, her present, her work, and she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. There was still so much work to do. There were still women being harassed, still women being denied opportunities, still women being told that they didn't belong. But there were also women like Cameron who had found a path. Women like Lisa who were claiming their space in elite units that had never wanted to give it to them. Women like the hundreds of young female service members who had written to Rebecca to say that her story had changed their lives. Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marcus. Just got word. The Pentagon is officially changing the Delta Force recruitment guidelines. They're removing language that, while not explicitly excluding women, has been functionally excluding them for decades. Your work. Your truth. Your sacrifice. It's making a difference. Rebecca read the message 3 times, and then she sat down on her couch and cried. Not from sadness, but from the strange emotional release that comes when you've been fighting for something for so long, and you finally see progress. Later that evening, she received another text, this one from an unknown number. She almost didn't open it, but something made her look. It was from Tyler, the man from the coffee shop. The message said, I've been following your work for a while now. I hope this isn't inappropriate to message you, but I wanted you to know that what you said to me in that coffee shop changed my life. I've been doing some work with my company to make sure we're recruiting and promoting women fairly, to make sure we're not making the same assumptions I made about you. I wanted to say thank you. I wanted you to know that sometimes, when you tell the truth and claim your space, it changes people in ways you don't expect. Rebecca smiled. She thought about the man at the coffee shop, about the judge from the other story, about all the people who had initially dismissed her, and who then, confronted with truth, had the choice to either accept it or reject it. Some had rejected it. But some, like Tyler, had made the choice to change. That was the thing about truth, Rebecca had learned. Truth had power. Not immediately, not always visibly. But eventually, inevitably, truth had a way of shifting things, of changing assumptions, of making space for new possibilities. Before she went to bed that night, Rebecca did something she did most nights. She stood in front of her mirror and she looked at herself. She looked at the woman who had been mocked, dismissed, disbelieved, and who had persisted anyway. She looked at the woman who had claimed her truth so loudly and so clearly that she had created space for other women to do the same. And she smiled. The patch on her wall had earned its place there not just through sacrifice and blood and the willingness to walk into danger. It had earned its place through the willingness to be visible, to be public about who she was, to refuse to hide or apologize for the space she occupied. Somewhere out there, a young woman was preparing for Delta Force selection. She had seen Rebecca's video. She had read her interviews. She had heard her congressional testimony. And she believed, with a bone-deep certainty, that it was possible for her too. That was the real victory. Not the recognition, though that mattered. Not the policy changes, though those mattered too. The real victory was that Rebecca had made it possible for the next generation of women to believe in themselves. And that belief, multiplied across thousands of young women, could change everything. On a quiet evening in Portland, as the sun set over the mountains, Rebecca Hayes, Delta Force veteran, founder of the Delta Generation Foundation, congressional witness, and bearer of a truth that had been desperately needed, sat at her kitchen table and wrote an email to Cameron, the young woman who had just earned her patch. "Dear Cameron," Rebecca wrote. "I wanted to reach out personally to congratulate you on earning your Delta Force patch. You did something that many said was impossible. You did something that, when I was your age, I had to do alone, with no guidance, no precedent, no proof that women could do it. But you didn't have to do it alone. There were women before you. There will be women after you. You are part of a legacy now, Cameron. And that legacy is that women belong in the most elite spaces, in the hardest places, in the positions that demand the most sacrifice. You belong. Remember that on the days when people try to tell you that you don't. Remember that you earned this patch the same way everyone else did, through blood, sweat, fear, and an absolute refusal to quit. Congratulations, Captain Chen, Private First Class. Welcome to the Delta Force family. Rebecca." She hit send and closed her laptop. Outside her window, the Portland rain began to fall. It was cold and steady, the kind of rain that had been falling on this city for centuries. Rebecca listened to the sound of it hitting her roof, and she felt at peace. She had walked a difficult path. She had sacrificed things she could never get back. She had faced people who didn't believe in her, and sometimes, she hadn't believed in herself. But she had claimed her truth. She had worn her patch with pride. And in doing so, she had opened a door for others. That was the real power of telling your story. It wasn't about getting recognition, though that came. It was about making it possible for someone else to tell theirs. As the evening deepened and the rain continued to fall, Rebecca Hayes sat in her home in Portland, Oregon, and she felt the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, of battles well fought, of truth well told. The patch had found its place in the world. And so had she.